host of short stories. Today's story comes from Greek mythology and is based on the work of Euripides. It was written sometime around 424 BC, and it takes place shortly after the fall of Troy to the Hellenic forces of Agamemnon and Menelaus. Hecabe, sometimes translated as Hecuba, was the deposed queen of Troy. Having lost her husband, eldest son, and kingdom, she became a slave of the Greeks. The story you are about to hear is one of bloody vengeance. Like most Greek myths, this one will leave you with mixed feelings, as Hecabe's tragic fate makes you feel sympathy for her. However, her response to her misfortune is a bit hard to justify. Vocabulary: misfortune, misfortune. Misfortune followed Mary everywhere she went. Misery, misery. The war brought a great deal of hunger and misery. Wretched, wretched. Klaus had a wretched childhood. Pity, pity. Lucy posted sad stories about herself in order to gain people's pity. Pathetic, pathetic. The Chicago White Sox has pathetic outfielding. Gnash one's teeth, gnash one's teeth. The angry customers gnashed their teeth and demanded refunds. Beseech, beseech. Don't go, I beseech you. Hem and haw, hem and haw. He hemmed and hawed for weeks before he decided to buy a boat. The story. On the shores of the Dardanelles, across the strait from the ruined city of Troy, rested the tent of King Agamemnon, leader of the united Hellenic forces. Floating above his tent was the ghost of the slain son of Queen Hecabe, Polydorus. This is what he had to say. From the dark recesses of the underworld I have come. I am Polydorus, the youngest son of Queen Hecabe and King Priam of Troy. My father, when he saw the approaching spears of the Hellenic army, sent me away to Thrace for safekeeping. I was supposed to live with Priam's ally, King Polymestor, who had vowed to look after me and keep me safe. With me, my father had sent a secret store of gold, so that, if worse came to worse, there might be enough cash on hand to restore the family fortunes. But when Troy fell and my father died in a pool of his own blood, Polymestor betrayed his oath, murdered me, and stole my family's treasure. He threw my body into the sea, where it is floating now, waiting to be washed upon the shore near this encampment. My poor mother, who has lost everything, is about to receive even more bad news. I can see her now, emerging from Agamemnon's tent. I have appeared to her in her dreams, in the hope that it may ease the shock caused by my death. O poor mother, once a queen and now a slave! What god did you offend to incur such misfortune? Hecabe came out of Agamemnon's tent, supported by two young women. On her left was her personal handmaid. On her right was her daughter, Polyxena. I dreamed about Polydorus again, she said to her daughter. I pray that the gods protect him, because he is the last male heir of our house. No sooner did she utter these words than a group of Trojan women approached her. We are slaves, began one of the women, and we have just been transferred from the neighboring Achaean camp, where the Greeks were holding a council. I'm afraid I have some bad news for you. Hecate gulped and replied, "Somehow I knew you'd come bearing terrible tidings. Out with it then. There's no point in delaying." The woman gently clasped Hecabe's hand as she relayed her message. "The Greeks have voted to sacrifice your daughter Polyxena to the ghost of Achilles." As she said this, she could not help but give Polyxena a remorseful glance. Hecate staggered backward a bit when she heard this news, forcing Polyxena to wrap both arms around her. "Oh, misery, misery! What else can I say? What a wretched old woman I have become!" Polyxena shed a tear as she tried to comfort her mother. "My dear mother, how you have suffered! I weep for you because you will have no one to care for you in old age. As for myself, I do not weep, for it is better to die than to live as a slave." Not a minute later Odysseus arrived from the Achaean camp. He introduced himself to Hecate and explained why he had come. "I have been appointed to bring Polyxena to Achilles' tomb to complete the ceremony. I know this is unwelcome news for you, but when things are bad, it's best to be rational. There's no use in resisting." Hecate fell on her knees and began begging Odysseus not to carry out his duties. "Take me instead," she pleaded. Odysseus calmly shook his head and said, "It is wrong not to honor the wishes of a fallen comrade." Hecate's handmaid, who was standing close by, gasped and exclaimed, "O gods, how wretched is the life of a slave, forced to endure the wickedness of the conquerors." Turning to Polyxena, Hecate lamented her failed attempt to save her daughter's life. "Perhaps your words will have more power than mine," she bewailed. Polyxena stepped toward Odysseus and said, "I will not beg for my own life. I will go with you willingly. It is wrong for a princess to live in dishonor." Odysseus silently nodded his head. As he led her away, Polyxena took one last mournful look at her mother and said, "Do not feel sorry for me, mother. For someone unaccustomed to the yoke, there is more happiness in death." After Polyxena exited the camp, the Trojan women tried to comfort their former queen. "Your daughter is of royal blood, that is unmistakable. You should be proud to have had a daughter like that." Hecate nodded, but replied, "The price of nobleness is heavy." Having lost the strength to stand, she slumped down on the ground and wept. Hours later, a messenger arrived from the Achaean camp. He asked the handmaid to bring him to Hecate. He found her curled up in Agamemnon's tent, dried out from too much crying. As he looked at her, he couldn't help but feel pity. How can the gods allow such misfortune to fall upon someone so undeserving of punishment? He thought to himself. "Hecate," he said with a slightly raised voice, "get up. Stand up now. Raise your head." Warily, Hecate looked up at the messenger and said, "Who is interrupting my grieving?" The messenger introduced himself and then proceeded to deliver his message. "Your daughter is now dead, and by the command of the Hellenic Council, I have come to fetch you to perform her burial rites." Hecate sat up, wiped the residue of dried tears from her face, and asked, "How did she die? Tell me, did she die nobly?" The messenger, holding back his own tears, gave a detailed account of Polyxena's tragic but noble execution. She knelt down on one knee and spoke the noblest words I have ever heard. She said, "Here is my breast, or if you prefer, my neck is ready for your blade. Strike home." Hecate put her hand on her heart as she heard this news. She thanked the messenger and asked him and anyone else who was listening, "What makes a person noble? Is it hereditary or upbringing?" The messenger did not know how to answer, so he said nothing. Hecate picked herself up and asked her handmaid to go down to the shore to collect some sea water so that she could wash her daughter's corpse. While the handmaid was collecting seawater, Hecate was cleaning herself up. She didn't want to look bedraggled and pathetic in front of the Greeks. "I'm the mother of the noblest children. I should look the part," she said to herself. Despite her misfortunes, Hecate was determined to put on a brave face. She had suffered the misfortunes of losing her crown and her beloved daughter within the same month. But the terrible thing about misfortunes is that they often come in threes. And just as Hecate was recovering from these first two misfortunes, a third and greater one was about to announce itself. The handmaid arrived leading a small party of Trojan women bearing a litter. Upon the litter was a small draped body. "Oh, poor unhappy Hecate," the handmaiden said, addressing Hecate. "What sorrow you must endure." Hecate, assuming the body on the litter to be Polyxena, replied, "Why are you bringing her body here? I thought the Greeks had built her a pyre." The handmaid exchanged worried glances with the other Trojan women. Hecate, sensing something was amiss, exclaimed, "O gods, who is that under the sheet?" The handmaid solemnly removed the sheet to reveal the face of Polydorus. "We found him washed up on the shore," explained the handmaid. "Oh, darling son, what shall I do?" moaned Hecate as she tore at her own clothing. "I saw this scene in a dream, but I wouldn't believe it to be true." The other Trojan women wept alongside their queen. "Who could have done this?" they wailed. Gnashing her teeth, Hecate growled, "Polymestor! That traitor must have killed him for our gold." At that moment King Agamemnon arrived. "Hecate," he began, "why do you delay attending to your daughter's body? And who is that?" Hecate hesitated in answering, but after a minute of silence she replied, "Agamemnon, I must beseech you to grant me a favor." He asked what it was, and Hecate, kneeling before him, explained, "This child you see here was my son. He was cruelly murdered by his caretaker, Polymestor." As Hecate continued her tragic story, Agamemnon's expression turned from sorrow to disgust. Finally, he said, "What kind of monster would murder a guest in his own house?" Hecate looked up at Agamemnon and said, "That's why you must listen to my request. I know that I am a slave, and you have no obligation to me, but a crime as black as this cannot go unpunished." Agamemnon hemmed and hawed and said, "But Polymestor is now an ally of the Greeks. We signed an agreement with him just a couple of days ago. My Achaean allies would never approve of such a thing. You must understand, the politics of this situation is very delicate." Hecate, clasping Agamemnon's right hand, exclaimed, "It is a good man's duty to uphold the right, and always, everywhere, to punish wickedness." Agamemnon sighed and responded, "What will you have me do?" Hecate's request was simple: invite Polymestor and his son to Agamemnon's camp. 2 days later, the foul murderer arrived, expecting a royal greeting. "Oh, Hecate," he began, "dearest friend, I'm so sorry for your loss. I came as soon as I got Agamemnon's message. He told me about Polyxena. How tragic!" Hecate feigned gratitude for his visit and told him how happy she was to see him. "Why did you ask Agamemnon to call me here?" Polymestor finally asked. "I have something very important to tell you and your son. It's of a very sensitive nature, so I thought it must be told in person. But before I do that, let me inquire about my son. Is he all right?" Polymestor froze for a few seconds before he answered, "Oh yes, Polydorus. He's fine. Have no fears about him." Hecate stepped closer and asked, "And the gold? Is it still safe too?" "Safe in my palace, closely guarded," was Polymester's prompt reply. Hecate smiled and said, "Good, because I have some more gold I wish for you to guard for me. Come into this tent so that we may discuss this privately." Polymestor, with a grin and a glint of greed in his eye, followed Hecate into Agamemnon's tent, with his young son in tow. Suddenly, from inside the tent came shrieks of pain and rage. "My eyes! My eyes!" cried Polymestor as 4 Trojan women held his limbs while the handmaid gouged out his eyes. Next came the muffled screams of Polymestor's son as Hecate grabbed him and slit his throat. "You'll pay for this!" raged Polymestor as he came stumbling out of the tent. "Rage all you want," yelled Hecate, "but I have my revenge." Polymestor spat on the ground and growled, "You murderous Trojan hags! I curse you!" Hecate and her accomplices emerged from the tent and stood around Polymestor in a circle. "Wretched man," said one. "I almost pity you," said another. "But severe crimes deserve severe punishments," said Hecate. "You roared Polymestor, "I'll tear you limb from limb!" The commotion that Polymestor was causing attracted the attention of Agamemnon, who rushed over with his bodyguard. "What's going on here?" he demanded to know. Seeing Polymestor crawling on the ground, his face smeared with blood, Agamemnon knew what the answer was. Polymestor, not knowing that Hecate and Agamemnon were on the same side, pleaded with the king to put his assailants to death. "I killed Polydorus for you and the Greeks," he falsely explained. "He was the son of your enemy. Now you don't have to worry about a Trojan resurgence." Agamemnon looked down at Polymestor in contempt and responded, "Maybe in Thrace to kill a guest is a misdemeanor, but in Greece we regard it as a heinous crime. Guard, take him away and throw him into the deepest pit." As the guard led Polymestor away, the raving blind man shouted to Hecate, "You may find joy in torturing me, but it won't last long. A prophet has told me that you are destined to drown in the sea like a dog. Sailors will build a mound on the shore to mark the spot where you ended your wretched life, and they will call it the Dog's Grave." Hecate calmly replied, "As long as I have my revenge, I don't care what happens to me." The other Trojan women stood watching this scene silently. But once Polymestor was out of sight, their thoughts turned to what would come next. "Tomorrow we leave for Greece, as property of our new masters," said one woman. "Fate commands," said another, "and no one can resist." The questions. Number 1. Who killed Polydorus? A. Polyxena. B. Polymorphus. C. Polymestor. D. Polynomial. The answer is C. Polymestor. Question 2. Which word describes Polyxena? A. Honorable. B. Estimable. C. Dignified. D. All of the above. The answer is D. All of the above. Question 3. How did Hecate get her revenge? A. By stealing all of Polymestor's gold. B. By stealing Polymestor's crown. C. By blinding Polymestor and murdering his son. D. By scratching the paint on his car. The answer is C. By blinding Polymestor and murdering his son. Question 4. According to prophecy, what will happen to Hecate? A. She will live a long and happy life. B. She will turn into a dog and drown in the sea. C. She will regain her throne. D. She will win the lottery. The answer is B. She will turn into a dog and drown in the sea.